Hello and welcome to Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. With us in our studio today is Windsor author Alynn Godfroy. She's a renowned financial retirement specialist and compelling speaker on the intricacies of retirement planning. Through decades of experience, she's guided Canadians through critical financial life transitions, be it retirement, business succession, or the unexpected loss of a family member. Today, Alynn's going to discuss her latest book, Retire on Purpose, a financial blueprint to protect your family and your wealth. Welcome to Scribes and Songsters.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So, retire with a purpose. What does that mean?
A lot of times people will come to see me and they have money that they put away into RSPs, tax-free savings, various instruments, and they don't really have a plan. And then sometimes they're at the mercy of an employer coming in saying, we're going to offer you a buyout. We're going to entice you to leave. So we want people to be able to retire with a plan and retiring when they want to on their own terms, not just, my employer is, downsizing me out of a position or offering me this buyout and you're scrambling around to try and figure out, can I retire? What am I going to do when I retire? So just making sure that people retire when they want to, but then also have things to do. So I don't just talk about the financial aspect. I care about what people's goals are, if they want to travel, what they want to do, and how they envision their retirement.
So what got you interested in looking after people's retirements?
Great question. So I started as a financial planner 22 years ago, and it honestly took me until I was 18 years in the business to really say, okay, this is an area I want to specialize in. So a lot of financial planners are generalists where, you might meet with some younger people and help them save for their first home. Maybe they have a baby and you help with education savings and do some retirement planning. But one of the things I share in my book is I had a few meetings in a very short time that made me say, okay, this is really the area that I want to focus on. And that's where I now spend my time working.
If you had it to sort of make a decision based on everything that you've experienced, would you say most or more people have a plan or more people don't?
More people don't have a plan. Absolutely. The statistic is that only 14% of people retire with an actual written retirement plan.
Wow.
Which is scary. That's not a lot. And the onus, and for people watching or listening to this, the onus is not on you as the individual. The onus is on the financial professional, right? So if someone comes to see me, I get paid a fee to manage a client's money. The onus is on me to say, okay, we're going to craft a plan that's going to work best for you. A lot of financial institutions are more than content, having you put money into an RSP each year and a tax-free savings. And then you let them know when you're retiring and when you want to start taking money out. But it's like you wouldn't get in your car and just hope that you'd end up in California if that's where you want to go. You're going to plug your information into a GPS and know which direction you're going in. The same as with your finances, is having that mapped out.
Yeah, you wrote a book 3 years ago, and we'll talk about all the wonderful things in this recent book. Tell me about your first book.
So the first book that I wrote was called Why You Need a Financial Advisor. So just a very just basic terminology about, what is an RSP? What is a tax-free savings? I gave some real life examples of people. I changed their names just so that people can get an idea of when should I be putting money into an RSP or a tax-free savings, which is a better fit in which case. Talked about buying your first home, just general savings. So I did that one. So that one actually I published in 2017, and that came out about a month before I found out I was pregnant with my son. So my whole plan, I have a friend that she had written a book in the health space, and she traveled all over across Canada to promote her book and sell it. Well, that didn't work for me in terms of being able to travel all over Canada. That was the original plan. So then I just did some online marketing with that book. And then I decided that it was time for a refresh because my views changed a lot after I had my son. A lot of things have happened in the world since then. We had changes with interest rates, increases in how much we can put in tax-free savings. So actually my Why You Need a Financial Advisor second edition I actually had one shipment already sent to my office. So those are available online, or if somebody contacts our office, we have lots of free copies.
Because that would be a good starting point, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I found your current book very well laid out. And I like the order that you've put things in. So I thought maybe we could just sort of go through some of what's in here. You say review your foundation. Can you explain what we should be doing to review our foundation?
So there's a few basic things that we should be looking at and knowing, what do you have available for Canada Pension and Old Age Security? That's sort of the base of what a lot of retirement plans are going to look like. And then also making sure that you have things covered off if you had an illness or an injury. And there's going to be some overlap through each layer, but just knowing what you really have to start with and work with, and then where do we need to be adding potentially more money for somebody to ensure that they can retire comfortably.
Do you find a lot of people don't understand the differances in like a TFSA or other investments?
Absolutely. That was one of the reasons to write that book. TFSAs have been around since 2009. So, we're talking 16 years, and there are still so many people that don't truly understand how they work. So a lot of my job is just financial literacy and education.
And then you talk about envision your future. So if someone's listening and they'll say, well, yeah, I'd like to envision my future. So what do I need to look at?
Just when you're finished work, you have an extra 40 or 50 hours a week on your hands. What do you see yourself doing? Do you want to live somewhere warm for 3 or 6 months out of the year? Do you want to golf? Do you have a hobby that's more expensive, that's going to cost you some money? You want to make sure that you have the money available to do the things you want to do.
There were a couple of other things. So would you recommend making a wish list?
Absolutely, yeah. But part of our process when I sit down with people for an initial meeting is we do what's called a right fit conversation. So find out what they're looking for me and an advisor. Usually they're coming to see me for a reason. There's typically lack of communication with an existing advisor, or an advisor's retired, the new person coming in, they don't necessarily gel with. But we ask them, what are your goals? Do you have some young people still living at your house that you need to get them out of your house so that you can maybe downsize, or maybe they're costing you a little bit more for groceries? What is your travel budget? Because if you have, an entire winter where you could be traveling versus maybe only have 2 weeks vacation, what does that look like? So really getting people to think about how they want to spend their time. And a lot of those ways they want to spend their time, there's going to be a cost associated with it, making sure that they have the funds available to do that. And also a lot of times I have clients where they've amassed so much money, they're never going to spend it all. Well, then how do we make sure that they're being strategic about taking that money out and spending it to enjoy themselves? Or perhaps they have kids or grandkids that they can help along the way and watch them not struggle versus leaving a pile of money to them when they pass away one day. And then, then eventually they get the funds. So just having a well-coordinated plan.
How often do you run into people who are ready to retire, but they've still got either kids living at home or kids on their payroll?
A lot. I would say 5 years ago, maybe once every couple of weeks, I'd have a discussion with people. But I would say now more than 50% of my conversations are with people that their kids are still living at home and they're trying to either figure out, can they move out and rent, or they're sometimes having to help their kids with down payments on homes to get them moved out. So I would say probably more than 50% now.
Do people often delay retirement because of that?
Some do, yeah.
Yeah. I must get very sort of difficult because on one hand, you don't want to turf your kids.
Right.
And on the other hand, if you're at or past the age, then you kind of look ahead and think, when?
Yeah, and that's sort of a sensitive topic. I have a lot of uncomfortable conversations every day with people.
I can imagine.
And I can appreciate that it wouldn't be easy to say to, a 25 or 28 or 30-year-old, hey, you're making $80,000 a year. And, I can't help but notice that you really haven't been, doing much savings, or, it's very costly to have groceries and, be paying for internet and everything else in the household. Can you help contribute in some form or fashion? I don't think it's wrong to charge your kids, $500 a month for rent to help pay for groceries. I have some clients that they charge their kids for rent. They're quietly putting money into a side account.
Yeah.
So when the kids do move out, there's money to help towards a down payment on a house, a wedding, furniture, etc. But I think it comes down to just having open dialogue with your kids and having them know. I have a lot of clients where their kids are still living at home. The kids are making more money than they are, and they're not helping contribute in any way. Yeah.
Do you ever run into a situation where I've heard a lot of talk about people who want to retire, but they have elderly children who need serious care. Either they've, been psychologically or physically impaired in some way, and they have nowhere for that child to go. That must get very difficult.
Yeah, actually, I just had a meeting with the family a couple of weeks ago where they said they've sought out social services, but they were basically told because they have a nice home, they have the ability and means to take care of their son, that they don't have a spot for him. And I said, okay, and hopefully these people will live for another 30 years. But then we also need to do some planning and project out that their 25-year-old son, 30 years from now, and he's 55, he'll probably still be alive and he could live for another 30 or 40 years. How do we plan effectively to make sure that there's money available? So we had a family meeting. They have a daughter that's in her early 30s, and we put together a plan and we said, this is what it's going to look like one day, when you do pass away, so that these parents can have peace of mind, right? They're very concerned that they have a son that no one's going to do a better job taking care of them than them, but they're not always going to be here one day. How do you plan so that financially you don't have to worry? Yeah, so that's part of what we do.
Now, trim your taxes. God help us. Who can trim taxes?
So the key is, we are filming this on April 30th, the last day of income tax season. We do at our office, I don't know how many we've done, somewhere between 800 and 1,000 tax returns this year. Yeah. So why we do taxes for people is that we can take a look and make sure that people are taking advantage of pension splitting if they're married or in a common law relationship.
How does that work? Does that mean half goes to one spouse and half to the other?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, we're in an automotive town. So let's say somebody's retired from Chrysler and they get a $50,000 a year pension. And let's say, the husband worked and the wife worked very part-time. She doesn't have a pension. The husband could give up to $25,000 of that pension to his wife to reduce the overall taxable income.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Now, CPP credit sharing, is that a similar thing?
Yes. So that's something that I find a lot of Canadians are not aware of. So for example, let's say, so today maximum Canada pension, if you're 65, is $1,433. So let's say, a husband is eligible for $1,400 a month. Wife maybe worked part-time until, the kids went to school, and perhaps maybe she's eligible for $600. We take the husband's $1,400, the wife's $600 she's eligible for, add them together, divide them by 2, then they each claim $1,000 per year or per month. The stipulation with that is both spouses have to be age 60 or older to do the pension credit sharing, and it's based on the number of years that you've been married or lived in a common law relationship. But it's a great way to reduce your taxable income. So you can imagine if somebody's worked and they have pension income they can split, plus the Canada pension credits, it can definitely help your taxes a lot.
Right. And what's a LIRA? LIRA?
Locked-in retirement account. So if you've worked somewhere where there's a registered pension plan, so in some cases you put money in and maybe it's a 3% of your paycheck and your employer matches it. In some cases, that money might be in an RSP. Some companies set it up as a registered pension plan. So a registered pension plan, when you leave a company, you roll it into a LIRA, a locked-in retirement account. the government put some restrictions as to how much you can take out each year. So really explaining to people how that works. There are a few clients that I have that work in the tool and die industry, people making good incomes, they're putting some money away, their employers are matching. And, we're talking, there's some people with $500,000 to $800,000 in these locked in retirement accounts. But what some people don't realize is that when you have money in a locked in retirement account, half goes into an RSP and you can access it. It's all taxable. Yeah. But the other half goes into something called a LIF, a life income fund. The government only lets you take 7% of that out per year, which isn't a lot of money when you think about it. So I lay that all out and explain it to people and stress the importance of not just saving in that work plan because, you could be making $100,000 a year, fast forward to when you're retired. And if you have, say, $800,000 in a lira and it splits off, well, 7% of $400,000 is only $28,000 a year, plus your RSP. Well, then you have to make sure that you have other money set aside. You may have Canada pension, old age, but that's how you want to do all of that planning across the board.
Interest income. How many people do you run into who don't realize that, if you've got a sizable bank account, you still have to pay interest on it to the government?
That's a great question, especially since I just finished so many tax returns. Well, in the last year, because interest rates were higher, GICs paid some pretty attractive rates. So I can tell when people have had a lot of money in a GIC because they get a T5 slip. And in box 13, if there's a really big number, it means they've made some decent interest. However, you pay the same tax on that as all of your other income. So you pay based on your marginal tax rate. Actually just met with somebody this past week, deals with a bank, has a financial advisor, but there's a lack of communication. TFSAs, a husband and wife, have less than $20,000 combined. They have $160,000 in non-registered funds that they have to pay interest income on. And I said, I don't know who your advisor is. I'm not going to ask. I just know what financial institution you're at. But Financial Planning 101, one of the first things a financial planner should be doing is making sure that your tax-free savings account is maxed out. So you can imagine if these people have $160,000 and then your GIC that's paying 5%, when that comes due, that's a pretty substantial amount of money you're going to have to pay interest income on. And this gentleman's making about $200,000 a year. It's ugly. This is a situation where the person probably should not be a financial planner, but anyway, we're making some changes. The GIC is coming due. I suggested some alternative ways to save, such as maxing out the TFSA and looking at other investments so that these people don't unnecessarily pay too much tax. That's a really easy one, but that's one this time of year that jumps out to me so much because to me, it's mind-boggling how many people don't realize how much extra tax they pay on that.
And you also talk about insulating your income. What does that mean?
So just making sure that if your health changes and you're not able to work, or perhaps you hurt yourself, making sure that you have a backup plan. If you work for a company where you don't have short or long-term disability and you're not able to work, our greatest asset is our ability to go out and work and make a paycheck, right? And then if you're not able to work for whatever circumstance, making sure that you have perhaps disability insurance, critical illness insurance, or God forbid, if you were to pass away, is there money left for your spouse to run a household, still be able to retire, et cetera? So we factor that into a plan as well.
You talk about segregated, this is in reinforcing your wealth. And you talk about something called segregated funds. Can you explain those?
So it's like having a mutual fund with an insurance wrapper on it. So how it works is if you said, okay, Alynn, I have $100,000, especially right now, the markets are a little erratic, right? So you invest $100,000 today. And 10 years from now, if that $100,000 has gone down to, say, $90,000, there's something called the maturity guarantee. This typically doesn't kick in a whole lot because over a 10-year time period, the markets generally tend to go up. However, there is something called the death benefit guarantee. So you invest $100,000. So let's say somebody invested $100,000 this time last year. And if they're in a medium risk portfolio, there's a good chance their portfolio is probably down a little bit. If that person, so let's say they started with 100,000, maybe it's worth 90,000 today. If that person passed away and their money was in stocks or in mutual funds at a bank, then what happens is just the market value gets paid out. So if that person dies, the spouse gets the $90,000 market value. With the segregated fund, the principal is guaranteed, so the spouse would get the $100,000 that was initially put in. This money also stays outside of probate. So obviously we all have to pay income taxes, but there's something else called probate fees. So when somebody dies, the government wants to know what you had. What was your house worth? What did you have in your bank account? Stocks, bonds, T-bills, GICs, jewelry, artwork. What is your total estate worth? Let's say it's worth $1 million. On the first $50,000, you don't have to pay probate fees, but after that, it's $15 per thousand. So your family is paying almost $15,000 to the Minister of Finance. That's the Ontario government. When money is in a segregated fund, so segregated means being kept separate, that money stays outside of probate, so there's less fees. I'm sure most people listening to this know somebody that there's been a fight in a family, there's been a disagreement over money.
Many.
Yes. And sometimes probate can take quite some time. It could take 6 months. It could take 2 years. When money's in a segregated fund, basically what happens, a client or client's family, the beneficiary, signs what's called a claimant statement. We get a death certificate. Within 2 weeks, that person's is receiving those funds. The money's also private. So when a will has to be probated, it becomes public record. So if a nosy neighbor or an ex-spouse or whoever wants to find out what that person had when they passed away, they can find that out. When money's in a segregated fund, it's like life insurance. Unless you told somebody you had it, nobody's going to know it's private. And there's also some creditor protection, which typically is not something that most people are concerned about. But I've had some clients that are business owners that have been concerned. And I've actually had a few clients that I never in 22 years would have thought would have been sued. But I've had a few clients that have been sued for different circumstances. And having their money in their segregated funds has really protected them.
Annuities, are they a good thing?
Depends on the situation. I've seen circumstances where somebody has received a large sum of money, whether it's an inheritance or from an accident. And an annuity is a nice way to ensure that that person doesn't run out of money. So it depends. If you have somebody that's a spendthrift, an annuity may make sense.
Right.
When interest rates are lower, sometimes annuities are not as attractive. So we look at those on a case-by-case basis.
Now, how much cash flow should you have? I mean, is there a certain amount of money, a minimum amount of money that you should have, readily in cash?
Most financial people will tell you should have 3 to 6 months total family income set aside in case of an emergency.
Right. Do most people do that?
No. No, but we're working on it. That's why the financial literacy aspect is huge, right?
Yes.
When you look at times like COVID, there are a lot of people that weren't able to work for a number of months just out of nowhere. So just making sure that you're protected, or in a time where we're in a down market right now, having some money set aside that's more liquid and cash instruments versus taking out money that you have in equities can definitely help you in that respect too.
What are you finding in terms of people working for companies that have pensions? Are you finding more companies are not providing a pension?
There are definitely a lot less companies providing pensions or having people work part-time so that they don't have to offer benefits. Yeah, that's definitely happening a lot more now.
So what advice would you have for someone who is retired? I mean, it's easy if someone's got a good chunk of money, but what about someone who is at retirement age and they look at what they have and it's pretty meager. They don't have, $500,000 set aside. What can you tell them?
Well, what we want to do is we want to look and say, okay, what do you need to run your household now? And then what expenses are going to stay there versus, because a lot of times if you're driving back and forth to work, then you're probably not going to spend as much money in gas. If you maybe have to cross into the United States, you're not going to have tolls. Your wardrobe might not cost you as much money if you're not worried about dressing fancy to go to work lunches, that sort of thing. But the key is how I lay it out for people is to show them, let's say you retire at age 65. So this year, so 2025, on the first $16,129 any Canadian makes, there's no tax. Then when you're 65, there's something called the age amount. So depending on what your income is, you get almost a $9,000 credit, again, before you have to start paying tax. Perhaps if you have a little bit of a pension or money that's in an RSP that you can turn into a RIF, you get a pension credit, which is a $2,000 credit. So a lot of Canadians can make $27,000, $28,000 before they start to pay tax. Whereas if when you're working, you have EI, CPP, maybe some union dues, maybe some pension payments coming off of a check. Looking at what you're taking home now versus what you would take home in retirement could be definitely an apples to oranges comparison. So depending on, what your goals are and, if you can live within your means, it might not be as dismal for people as they want. And I always tell people, like, don't be an ostrich and put your head in the sand and just hope for the best. Don't be intimidated to talk to a financial advisor. I tell people that I'm on the no judgment zone. Come see me. Let's see what you have going on. And we'll see where you need to tweak and make some changes.
I found it interesting that you also talk about what to do if you think you might outlive your retirement or the amount of money you have. So what's the best advice if you set aside a certain amount and you think, like, I hear guys say all the time, well, it's rare for a man to live beyond 80 and you set aside until you're 80, but what if you live till you're 101?
Well, hopefully you've got, access to Canada Pension, to old age security. Perhaps you might be eligible for an income supplement. Definitely, there are a lot more people doing reverse mortgages. I would
what's your thought on that?
They serve a purpose for some people. I don't believe in using that as a crutch. I really think people should save, but if that's a last resort, then that's a last resort because there are some fees and charges and not everybody can necessarily qualify for one. Sometimes people wait too long. I've seen a few people in their 70s and they've wanted to get a reverse mortgage and the companies have told them that they're too old. So, everyone's circumstance is unique. The sooner that you can start to plan, really the better.
Yeah. So tell us where people can get your book, because this is really worth reading. It's called Retire on Purpose. Where can people get it?
It's available on Amazon. And if you go to our website, you can also listen to the audio version. You can get a PDF version of it as well, too.
Great. And very briefly before we go, what do you do to kind of chill from all of this?
Oh, my spare time?
Yeah.
Well, I have a 7-year-old that likes to do Lego, so we do a lot of Lego. We have a beautiful pool that we're going to be opening this week. So I used to be a competitive swimmer when I was younger. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for coming and telling us all about this.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's it for this edition of Scribes and Songsters. I hope you've learned something because I know I have. Many thanks for all the great information from Alynn Godfroy. Thanks to our Scribes and Songsters team, producer Brian Sweet and technical producer and editor Gary Glass. Grateful thanks to Tony Toldo and the Toldo Foundation and to Neil and Tina Queering for their support. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon, right back here on Scribes and Songsters. I'm Veronique Mandel. Bye for now.